Good evening and happy Sunday to anybody who's listening. I hope you all worshiped God today and did a good job about doing that. I think there's a big misunderstanding in our culture about pleasure specifically. And I'll just state the thesis right ahead of time, and then we'll see if we can support it with enough evidence. It is never okay to seek after pleasure for its own sake. It is never okay to seek after pleasure for its own sake. That doctrine, in its various forms, would be called hedonism. It just comes from the Greek word for pleasure, pleasure seeking the entire life long. I think people get themselves into a lot of confusion when they make something that we've got a special word for this, right? Pleasure is always supposed to be concomitant with something good. It comes alongside of something else good that you've acquired. It's never supposed to be floating out on its own. So we can take this in a very easy to understand way. Take it with food. It's never okay to eat food sheerly for the pleasure of eating it. There should always be some relationship to nourishing your body. Like that absolutely has to be the case. Otherwise, you're misusing your capacity. You are taking the fruit of something, not for the sake of having the fruit, but for the sake of having the thing that comes along with the fruit. Never okay. Never okay. And this is a remarkably malleable thing, right? So we got to have just a little bit of awareness about the situations. It might be okay in certain circumstances to eat more than you ordinarily would, right? And you're not simply doing that for the sake of pleasure, for the sake of eating. Maybe you're doing it for the sake of celebrating with other people. And you have, we'll say, more calories and richer food in the context of we're celebrating this thing. So I'm going to have a big piece of cake. That's why I'm doing this. That's a good enough why to increase the quantity and quality of the food for a special occasion, because you're not doing it simply for the pleasure of having the cake, but because we're human beings and we celebrate by eating, a little bit of extra cake when there's something worthy to celebrate with other people. If you can understand that, if you can accept that principle, then some of the most controversial parts of Catholic moral teaching become almost self-evident, right? That the only legitimate use of that other major pathway to pleasure, our capacity for reproduction, can only be limited to its proper end. This is given to us for reproduction, and therefore, any use that would intentionally exclude that would intentionally frustrate that end, is ultimately going to boil down to your using this for the pleasure of the thing without actually reaping the fruit of the thing. So that's just a little helpful thing that you might find helpful. And the second thing is there is a difference between relaxation and leisure. Both of these might at first glance appear to be just for pleasure, but another useful distinction in this kind of topic might be that relaxation is something you do for the sake of working later. So, I had a road trip with the bishop. I had a road trip with the bishop this morning. I had to get up earlier than I ordinarily do. I had to do, over 4 hours of driving today and MC a mass, carry stuff around, all that stuff. When I got home, I sat in front of the TV for like an hour or so, relaxing the muscles, just letting things lie fallow, letting things take a break so that tonight I would be in an energetic state so that I could think properly and engage with you, my audience, properly. And that's fine. That's an appropriate amount of relaxation there for the sake of further work. Leisure, on the other hand, leisure is something you do for its own sake. So relaxation happens so that you can work some more, so that your body and everything can recover. Leisure is something you do for its own sake. So on Friday night, I listened to a vinyl record that I hadn't listened to in a good long while, "A Trick of the Tail" by Genesis. That wasn't done for the sake of something else. That was done for my own enjoyment and hopefully enrichment of my soul, right? To enjoy this thing for its own sake, not just the pleasure it brings, but also hopefully, I mean, it's not Bach, it's not anything spectacular, but it is a little more elevated than churlish pop music. So hopefully it helps to ennoble my soul along with it. So, two helpful things that you might like. It's never morally permissible to seek after pleasure for its own sake, and that relaxation and leisure are not the same thing, but they can oftentimes look the same. So, we've got a few people here tuning in tonight. Glad to have you here. The link is posted and pinned, so you're welcome to join me. I did have an appearance on Mr. Sam Adams' channel on Transfigured, just basically talking about how much me and Hank love Catholic liturgy. So it's about an hour long. If you listen to it at double speed, it's half of that, and you might find it useful. I'll say hi to Mandy here, who she can't stay, but she's posted prayer requests from her for her children, specifically some medical issues, and I've been consistently doing that because that's what I get paid for, is to offer up prayers. It's my position in the church. Very happy to do it. And yeah, Mark agrees. So cool. And Nico says hello. Cool.
I do agree. I like the topic. It's good stuff. Even though I'm still angry about the book club, but that's okay. I'll get over it.
I was on the road when book club was supposed to happen.
No, I know. It just, Manuel and I were both like, "Oh yeah, what are the chapters?" And I went, "Oh wait, he canceled it."
Unfortunately, my life doesn't
priest.
revolve around my YouTube channel. Actually, fortunately, my life doesn't revolve around my YouTube channel. So
Very fortunate indeed. What? So you were on when were you on Transfigured?
On Friday, but I think the video dropped today.
Oh, okay. And what exactly did you talk about?
So Hank wanted to talk about connections between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and how the Catholic Church carries that legacy of the priesthood and sacrifice through, and the way we did it. And he was working with a lot of Brant Petrie stuff, and I don't think he got through his whole outline because we got distracted on other topics, which means we've got more things to do there.
Oh, good.
Samuel Ewing's asking, I thought you were like 35. Why are you listening to Genesis? And I say to that, so?
Right. Yeah, he listens to old school Yes as well. I can attest. So, yeah. I listen to Zeppelin. I mean,
Yeah. And then to have a nice glass of wine and enjoy it and appreciate it as a gift from blessing from God, and that's it. Wouldn't it fall into this category? As long as it's something that's calorically needed. I mean, that could be relaxation, right? Relaxation at the end of the day, and giving thanks to God for a nice glass of wine. I don't think that's a problem. It sometimes it can be a little hard to discern, but oftentimes when we have too much of a good thing, our conscience lets us know. So, you sit down and watch TV for an hour, that's fine. I was mostly not really paying that much attention to it. But, you go have too much of it, all of a sudden you're not relaxing anymore, you're overindulging.
Yeah. Well, so, the trick is the presumption that it's a blessing from God. And if you're an alcoholic, it certainly is not.
Yeah, right. And it should not lead to scrupulosity. Some people just get scrupulous, though.
Right.
So, and yeah, cannabis smells evil. So,
yeah,
that's all I need to say about it.
Also destroys your ability to think over time. Yet another study. I'm like, these studies are 70, 80 years old, but I guess we're going to keep doing them until we like believe the first ones that said the same thing.
Well, and some of my biggest, the thing that I just recently noticed about the pot legalization people, because they're trying it again in North Dakota. There's another referendum on the ballot. Is the only argument that they really have is we should be allowed to do this.
Yeah.
Like, there's
It's
no
a freedom
argument for
argument.
saying this is actually going to make things better,
That's
other
right,
than
because it
like,
won't. It will make
you know,
everything worse. Right.
oh, we're not going to be prosecuting, drug only offenses. And I'm like, I don't know how many jurisdictions you'd still go to jail for possession of marijuana.
Never happened once.
Okay, so we have it from
Ever.
Mark. He's got the citations. I don't. So you ask him and not me.
Yeah. Usually what happens is you go to court for 4 things and you plead out of the things you're guilty of and they nail you on the pot. And that's actually why they changed the laws to be more strict about pot, because nobody's doing drugs in a vacuum. Right? And the people that quote are doing drugs in a vacuum, they get caught all the time and the police never even try to charge them like that. Sorry.
Prosecutorial discretion, right?
Prosecutor. Well, even before that, right? Whether or not we even write a report.
Mm-hmm.
And like I know tons of people all the time they get caught with pot and they know the cops, and the cops, like, they're good. They don't do anything else. But if you go look, like they say all the time, there's people in federal prison for this, and go open their court cases. I did. You would not want those people on the street. Almost all of them child abuse. Almost all of them illegal guns that aren't legal with a permit in the United States. Cannons, grenades, almost all of them more than one drug. Almost all of them have like coke and heroin and everything else, not just marijuana. They plead out of all the other stuff. And that's why the penalties are so severe, because the lawyers figured out a way to get them around all the gun laws and all the other nonsense laws. But they're always horrific stories. And you're like, wait a minute. But everybody just goes, oh, see, at the end of the equation, this was the conclusion. It's like, yeah, but what was the process? Like, what did they go through it? Every single case I read, and I read quite a bit of them, and I was like, well, what are these people talking about? None of these people are the type of people that any of these people would want on the streets. They all had gun records. Not only gun records, but like they were found with like major weapons, machine guns, all sorts of stuff. And I was always like, oh, well, why didn't they get pinched for that? So this is just a myth that people tell to manipulate you. Don't be manipulated by myth makers. It's terrible. And they know you're not going to look it up. They know you're not going to do your own research, because no one ever does, except me.
Well,
I research everything.
I know lots of people aren't going to do my own research on me when I'm preaching, right? Say, it's Catholic doctrine. It's in the catechism, right? And I just try to use my authority well.
Yeah, they're just going to agree or disagree on their perception of your authority, and that's it.
Yeah. So, and you kind of have to do that, right? Like,
you do that with lots of things, because I
watched like a tech YouTube channel about Intel's failing 13th and 14th gen processors, right? It's like, I'm not going to look that up. I sure hope you're just telling me correctly that their high-end processors have a microcoding error that lead them to call for way too much voltage, because I'm not going to look that up. Why would I care? Yeah. I'm on an AMD platform, baby.
Yeah, it's a design flaw, actually. Well, there's 2 flaws. Yeah.
Do you have an obligation in associating with a person to consider if you might be platforming heresy? I mean, there's always, an opportunity to prudently evaluate any particular scenario. If you're referring specifically to going on to Sam's channel, he, true to his credit, as an inheritor of the Anabaptist tradition, he lets a lot of people onto his channel and lets them talk. right? So it's a very wide open space. And I'm sure there's people he wouldn't have on, or he wouldn't have on twice. Or maybe if they had a disastrous conversation, he would opt not to publish it. So that's just kind of the so going onto his channel, it's like, well, yeah, I'll take your pulpit for Pete's sake. I'll talk to your people.
Yeah,
That's a
exactly.
no-brainer, right? Like,
Right.
speaking to a wider audience there. And the nice thing about Catholicism is that we've got these different levels of teaching. So I've got a much graver obligation um, to when I'm preaching, because I'm standing up there in an authoritative position. So I don't do near as much freewheeling exploring as I do when I'm just turning on the
Yeah,
webcam on a Sunday night and talking to whoever shows up.
right.
And I think people understand the difference between that. And if they don't, then
They don't.
I'll,
Well, they don't understand the point you made, which is, well, you weren't platforming him, he was platforming you technically, right? But also, I, y- you shining forth goodness in a dark place. And you can do that by contrast, right? You can have a dark person on your platform to exemplify this is why we're better, right? Like it's not a one-way connection like that.
yeah.
Everything's enchanted.
Okay. We've got another maybe a little bit of follow-up to give us an insight into his thinking about it. Sam Tiedemann, yeah, his name's public now. Sam Adams, Transfigured YouTube channel, has claimed a big-time Christian YouTuber, I think that would be Gavin Ortland, is basically giving him the silent treatment, which
Yeah.
the reason that like Catholic and Orthodox folks can talk to a guy like Sam and remain, pretty calm, just kind of politely curious, but like not really getting ourselves into a tizzy over that, is because for Catholics, he's already outside the wire, right?
Yeah.
So he's not really associated all that, it's like, oh, this Christian, but he doesn't believe in the Trinity. Um, he has a much more visceral reaction around Protestants because he makes some pretty strong arguments for Unitarianism on, wait for it, sola scriptura, on the basis
Right.
of Scripture alone,
Of
and
course.
like he really asks a lot of uncomfortable questions. And I don't think he has much hope in converting the Catholic Church or any of the Orthodox churches, because he's like they're too far gone. Like they've codified this into dogma, and in their minds it's revealed in the tradition, um, revealed liturgically, or the revelations contained in the tradition. So it's that. So yeah, it's much more dangerous for Gavin Ortland to talk to Sam than it is for Trent Horn to talk to Sam. Right? Trent Horn, Catholic apologist. He's got his YouTube channel. He's maybe the most sophisticated apologetics large language model the church has ever trained. And yeah, he could just sit down and have a conversation with Sam just based on those ecclesiological differences. So yeah, I think that's part of it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I
But
I
discernment is where everyone's struggling.
well, I mean,
Mature
it is
Pageau
hard.
did it. Mature Pageau did a talk recently on Dan Shervin's channel, and he mentioned discernment in a particular context. And I'm like, that's the word everybody needs to learn. 'Cause that's what y'all are missing, right? Everybody's got a very flat worldview of everything, and there's a lot more there if you care to engage with it.
Well, and I think yeah, it's really tricky to write about, because the answer, and like you get to Aristotle, you get to Aquinas, and they've got all of their categories and ways of talking about things, and what they always end up with is basically what we could say in two words: it depends.
Yeah, yeah, right.
And
Discernment.
if
Yeah,
you
it
if you
always
don't
comes
know
down
how to
to it.
do it, then find somebody trustworthy and ask them what they think.
Right.
Because if they have the virtue of prudence, which I think would be connected to discernment,
Yep.
then they'll just like know, and they'll know perhaps in a way that they can't rationally explain first, but like if they've got that virtue, well inhabited, they're not going to bat 1,000, but they're going to bat better than average.
Yeah.
And that's good enough for
Well, good enough is another big problem people have. They want perfect, and they don't even realize that's what they're looking for. But good enough is good enough. Right? The perfect is the enemy of the better. Just make it better. You can do that.
It also says something about YouTube not giving you an incentive to associate with smaller channels. And quite frankly, I'm not sure 100% sure Tiedemann's take is completely right. And that's correct, because the only person who could answer that would be a very honest Gavin Ortland who understands his own motivations and reasoning.
Yeah, I don't think YouTube in the end, like, things function a certain way in reality, and everybody keeps blaming not that, right? They're like, oh, it's YouTube. No, like
The magical algorithm.
it's not the magical algorithm. Yeah, that's if all you post on Twitter, if all anybody posts on Twitter are smiley faces, the algorithm will just give you smiley faces. I hate to break it to you, but it really can't do much else other than that and ads. Right? But like algorithms don't have that power. Platforms don't have that power. Small things are small, and try making them bigger often breaks them. So, people talk about this all the time. Oh, I became famous and that corrupted me. Yeah. I'll take the small channel. Thank you very much. You don't even know what you're asking for at some level. Like this is not better. And yeah, Sam has some really well nailed down arguments. Unfortunately, they're wrong. And when he makes wrong arguments, he's not very good at recognizing that, unfortunately, even when it's pointed out to him 6 ways to Sunday, and he can't logically weasel his way out. But that's people. Like I was talking to somebody for 2 hours who literally kept saying, give me the definition of knowledge. And I kept giving him the exact same definition every time. And then he said, well, it's because you're talking too much. And I'm like, no, this definition was one that somebody else gave you and one you just read in a book. All I did was come in after those 2 attempts and do a 3rd attempt. And then he couldn't admit that was happening. I'm like, no, you just keep rejecting the simple definition that I literally have given you 10 times. 10. Yeah. That's the kind of people we are. Like that's peopling.
I always wonder where you find these particular people.
Well, this is another Bridges of Meaning refugee, of course. So that's one place.
Well, I haven't fled the city. I'm still on there. Take care of the little flock.
Good luck.
Shining a light that, well, there's more action in the voice chats than there was 3 months ago. Maybe you'll.
Yeah. It comes. It's very cyclical.
Yeah.
It's very cyclical. Yeah, I know who's there now. Good luck.
Yeah.
Well, that was the other thing Mature said. He said centrism is a problem. These people trying to snake themselves in the middle, and he used the word snake, and I'm like, bingo. Yes, more of that.
I mean, yeah. It's like, so if people are like all oriented towards the same goal, they want to redo the buildings at a church. And it's okay, how much can we afford to do? And what are the priorities? And like maybe people want to do a lot, and other people are like, we don't have enough money for that. And they're able to meet in the middle. Like that's one thing. And compromise is appropriate there when you can't get people to meet except in the middle, right? But they're all trying to do the same thing. And then it's like, worship the one true God of heaven or worship the many gods of the Romans. Well, I think, what if we just like compromise and say,
exactly,
hey, we've got these 4 Roman gods that we're going to accept along with the one true God of heaven. It's like, well, no, we need to be extremists on that. Just the one, please. Thank you.
Well, there's a difference between identifying for or with and identifying against. And centrists, moderates, whatever you're calling them this week, they're identify against people. They're like, well, I'm not the right or the left. Okay, but what are you? Because there's a lot in between, and it's undefined and probably undefinable too. By the way, I did a whole video on navigating patterns on on this very topic, basically about libertarianism. It's an impossible condition, and yeah, that's where it all breaks down. I like what Ship Clerk said though about the hermeneutics of algorithm suspicion. I, I'm totally stealing that and not crediting you at all.
And
That's
it's really
fantastic.
funny because you can trace an algorithm perfectly and you can understand exactly why it did that. So
True.
if you have the appropriate technical skill, and not everybody does, you can actually trace exactly why that video was shown to me on my front page.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all just math.
It's math. At the end of the day, it's all just math. It's easy. And that's why some people succeed, because they hit the math correctly. And then the algorithm changes. But once you achieve a point of scale, we'll call it, once you achieve a point of scale, you now have momentum. And the algorithm has no control over that. Algorithms are controlled by momentum. No matter what you do to the algorithm, momentum will always win. The question is, which direction is the momentum going in? That's the different this is why you need discernment. Like, the answer is always discernment and more discernment.
Yeah, but that's hard.
It's the work. That's the work. That's the struggle. Yeah. The discernment, more discernment. And nobody wants that. And it's interesting too, because what I'm seeing is, sort of the Protestant world, which is kind of coattailing on this idea of Christianity that doesn't work once Protestantism emerges. What ends up happening is they're all going back to the Old Testament, but the people who were already in the Old Testament and integrating it are bumping up against the divine feminine, which is where that's where the rubber really hits the road. And so you can see this chain of like people way out here who are kind of getting closer and all the new stuff, all the new novelty in the Old Testament, cool, right? And then they're trying to integrate with what they knew before, right? Because they were just gospel people, right? And then like then there's the people who are already there, like the Pageau brothers, and they're like, no, we got to talk about the divine feminine. And they don't necessarily have a way to do that, and maybe you can't, but whatever, different problem. But like they're out in the vanguard, and I'm just seeing all this going, oh, this is so much fun, and like, make me some more popcorn, please. This is hysterical.
Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting. So we had that big conference last weekend in our diocese, and we invited in a big famous speaker, Dr. Scott Hahn. He's written all of the books, and reads Hebrew and Greek and half a dozen other languages and all of that. And he gave a real awesome talk, which unfortunately I don't think we're contractually allowed to put on YouTube because needs to sell books.
Fair.
But it was just 100%. The setting was the road to Emmaus. It's the day of resurrection, but Cleopas and the other disciple don't know that yet. They're running out of town. Jesus comes up and walks alongside with them. He asks them, hey, what are you guys talking about? And they're like, haven't you heard about this Jesus of Nazareth? And Jesus is like, well, obviously he had to suffer. So why are you guys looking sad right now? And he he just imagines what that first Bible study would look like, because it talks about how along the way Jesus was explaining to them all the things in the Old Testament that were referring to him in the New. And he accidentally went an hour and a half on that. Just really. And I was sitting there thinking, boy, yeah, he didn't cover all of that, right? So can't remember where I was going with this, but yeah, it's but yeah, so you got 1,000 people. That's a lot in North Dakota.
Yeah. That's a lot
And
of people.
people were just absolutely entranced by him doing that. No, I don't even know what parthenogenesis is.
That was easy.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, and then just noticing at the same time, Hank from the Transfigured channel, a regular guest on the Transfigured channel, got excited about the same kind of material, right? The
Yeah.
same kind of
Yeah.
symbolic linking between Old and New Testament, so much so that he said, "Hey, Sam, we're going to go do a video." And Sam was like, "Okay, free content, no prep, that's easy." And then they brought me along because I'm an actual practitioner of the priesthood according to the order of Melchizedek. So,
Excellent.
yeah.
Yeah, but you can get lost in all that new propositional, propositionally speaking about symbols. Yeah, you kind of can. I don't know that you should, right? It's yeah, the symbolic world people are going nuts. So it's been interesting to watch them.
Oh, well, hopefully they touch grass and make some barbecue or something.
Well, that was so one of the guys I've been talking to, he and I mostly agree, although yeah, there's a few things I'm like, that's gonna lead you astray. But he was like, yeah, you should read the language of creation, and then you should basically go outside and practice it. And I'm like, yes, exact that is exactly correct. Well, I just say it's not even a book. Like if you're reading the book, you're screwed already. You're down a rabbit hole. You should. You're doing it wrong. It's
You
not
could
a
also
traditional book.
just go outside and practice doing good. So
You could get all of the information conveyed in the book without ever opening the book. That is true. So the fact that we're here is already the problem, but it's good that we have that to help some people at least make a little bit of progress, I guess.
yeah, just look at the pictures and you're good.
That only works for certain Catholics, but yes. The Catholics are like, oh yeah, these pictures are correct. I don't know what these words are all
I bet
about,
you
but
there's some
whatever.
Orthodox babushkas out there that would be like, why are you wasting? Of course.
Oh yeah. Oh, by far. Yeah. Yeah. People get really caught up now because we live in the age of gnosis where knowledge is propositions and the highest value. And it's like,
Benjamin Franklin, pray the rosary.
yeah, pray the rosary, pray to
Right.
Mary.
You're already on YouTube, right? And like honestly, I don't care about the algorithm. I don't care about my statistics, right? Just type in the glorious mysteries into YouTube. You'll probably find Bishop Barron doing it. He'll be reliable. He's got a nice, pleasant accent. But like any of these, like pray the rosary on YouTube and then just pray the rosary and just sit with Mary and think about our Lord's resurrection, ascension, the descent of the Holy Spirit, her assumption into heaven and coronation of Mary as Queen of Heaven and Earth, and like that'll just fix
Problem
it.
solved. Yeah,
Yeah.
just do the thing. Just do the thing. Do the
Just do
hard
the
work.
thing. Right. It's not even that hard. It's children could. I was doing it when I was 5.
It is hard because they won't do it. They just refuse. Some of them do it and then they can't continue or whatever. It's like, oh my goodness. It is hard. These little cults. Just call it these little cults, Father. It'll be fine.
That's your job. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm still amazed that people listen to this at all because I don't know. I'm just amazed.
It's good relaxation from the hard work of being awesome.
Okay, that's good enough. Nico asks, I've been praying the rosary, but I'm supposed to pray 10 Hail Marys and read the passages at the same time. So the rosary is popular piety. And what that means is that it came kind of from the people, and it isn't an established pattern regulated by the church. Now, it is probably the oldest and most venerable devotional popular piety that we have in the tradition, which means that all sorts of people have had all sorts of takes on it. So it originally began with, I think, 150 Our Father, Hail Mary, and Glory Bees. And that was the original form of it. And this was a way that people could participate in praying the Psalter, right, 150 Psalms in the monastery, while they were actually illiterate peasants who weren't chanting the Psalms 8 hours a day. But they would do these prayers while they were about their chores, and that was their connection to the monastics there. And then as time went on, it came into the form that we know about it, and the mysteries sort of got set by popular, just kind of popular acceptance there. So it sounds like you've got like a booklet that's like a how to pray the rosary booklet, and it's got passages for you that you look on with every Hail Mary, which is a fine time-honored tradition, and you can do it that way. You don't have to do it that way. So I can't give you like a definitive answer on how to do it, but I would say that some people find those booklets helpful to keep them focused and give them things to meditate on, and other people might not think that the booklet's all that helpful and would prefer to just meditate on the mysteries without the assistance of a booklet. So if that's the way you feel, then do that. Otherwise, you can like read the little meditation and then say the Hail Mary. Both are perfectly legitimate options when you're praying by yourself. If you're praying with a group, you do as the group does. So
I don't think you can pray by yourself.
okay, you can pray in a room without other people present, though.
Yes. That's an important distinction.
That is a very important distinction, and we can specify that. And yeah, let's move on. So, Rosary, big fan today. Bishop and I prayed it while we were out on the road. I was driving, and I didn't have a booklet because I was driving.
No book, no gnosis, no hardbound gnosis. Oh my goodness. How did you survive?
I can pray the rosary at the same time I'm doing something else, and that's great because I drink coffee all the time for the nerves. Okay, yeah, you can pray and drink coffee at the same time. That's cool.
Drink coffee to give you nerves? Because that's what will happen. I'm just saying. So whatever.
When Mark FM and I do our reading series, we often talk almost as much with the recording off as on. Seeing what catches on with the PVK cult, I sometimes wonder if we're doing it wrong. What are you trying to do? I'm just trying to talk to Mark.
Telos.
Yeah. Oh my. Here we go.
Look at this. Get the big guns now.
Can you pray the rosary while you're driving while also drinking coffee? So I did have a mug of coffee next to me while I was driving, and I put the coffee down so I could do only 2 things at the same time rather than 3. Yeah.
I approve this message. Yeah, don't cognitively overload yourself by trying to do too many things at once. Spread things out in time. The more time you take for things, the better they integrate. It'll change your life. You can do less. You will do less, but also it'll all be better. So I'll do less and make it better. I'm good with that.
I mean, that's kind of why seminary for Catholic seminary kind of has to be a little unpleasant.
Yeah.
Because you want to figure out who actually wants to be there, So it's hey, morning prayers at 7, guys, and you're going to be there. And if you're not, that's a problem. And evening prayers at 5. And I know you're all grown men, but you have a curfew at 10 on weeknights and 11 on weekends. So deal with it.
Yeah. Well, if you can't conform to a structure, you can't be part of a structure. It's good to know that early on. For whatever reason. I mean, there's maybe different reasons. Usually you're just rebellious.
You shouldn't go there to find a girl. That would
that'd
be the wrong way of doing things.
But it happens, that's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's why the old seminaries are, it's like Council of Trent to Vatican II. It's actually kind of nicely bookended. It's like it was done monastic style. Was not done, and that wasn't working. So we've tried opening things up a little bit and making things a little less rigid.
The number of people, there was a particular online system a million years ago I was on. The number of people that would claim to be monks to attract women would shock you. Hint, it was all of them, by the way. that none of them were actually monks.
Hey, Nick, how you doing?
Hey, great, and you, Father Eric, and hi, Mark. Yeah, so I was given a booklet for praying the Rosary.
Mm-hmm.
Very
And
nice.
are you happy with it? Why don't you hold it up for us so we can see it?
Give me a sec. So it's
Oh, it's in Spanish. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't
So
even speak English, so I don't. That Spanish is completely foreign to me.
and it has the instructions over here,
mm-hmm.
and it said that you have to pray 10 Hail Marys while contemplating the mysteries.
That's the
And when I
goal.
read that, my interpretation was you have to do both things at the same time. So that's what I did.
Yeah. No, that's the idea. That's the idea. It's supposed to be like, and if you practice it regularly enough, like you don't have to think about praying the Dios te salve Maria anymore, right? You don't have to worry about praying the Padre Nuestro anymore. Those words just kind of start flowing through you, and you're just counting on the beads, and that the motion of reciting the prayers and counting the beads is supposed to kind of physiologically uh,
Yeah, it's like
help.
a muscle memory.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which is why
yeah.
This is why I was introduced to it when I was very young, and as much as I had trouble sitting still in those days, it's what is going on with the Protestants there? They're still
They're
talking
just
about seminary and saying you're going there to fight. She's everybody's mom, universal mom. That's what's going on here.
yeah, they don't have conceptions that sophisticated. They're all flat worlders, unfortunately.
Universal mom. It's just sorry. And vocation is more permanent than profession, I think, unless you're talking about like
Vocation,
a religious profession, in which case that's how you get into a vocation. So
yeah, but a vocation is the higher thing, the telos.
yeah,
The profession is closer to the material implementation.
yeah. So have you
Yeah.
just picked up the Rosary recently, Nick?
Yeah, only recently. Never before was I given one of these. I did have the Hail Mary and the Our Father, so it wasn't that hard. It was mostly there were a few prayers there that I didn't know. Um, Jesus, forgive our sins, and
See, that's a recent addition right there. That's a very recent addition. That was a prayer given to the children of Fatima by Our Lady in like the early 20th century while World War I was going on. So it's called the Fatima prayer.
ah,
So it's a
I
real
didn't know that.
apparition if it got people to change the way they're saying the Rosary, because they've been doing that for hundreds of years.
Oh,
Yeah. Did you see the crazy Protestants related it to their poor attempt at copying the Catholics?
what?
Yeah, the Chicks Tract stuff. Whatever. They
I
described
think that
that
was
online.
just a joke.
It
It was
was
just a
but
joke.
still.
Yeah.
They like to be cheeky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jealousy. That breeds cheekiness.
Yeah, I was saying in the comments that I find that often, I don't know, it sounds like Protestants spend too much time on the Old Testament. It's Moses all the
Recently.
time.
Yeah, recently, but the trend has been the opposite way for decades. It's only recently shifted, right? As they sort of run out of material, they move.
Oh, really? Oh,
I mean, part of it is, I think, kind of the recession of modernist biblical scholarship of the higher criticism and all of that. which does not have nearly the status that it once did. So, we kind of learned the basics of it in seminary. We didn't get that deep into it, thanks be to God. You're basically just chopping the scriptures up and like analyzing them as if, you were dissecting a frog. And like, okay, dissecting a frog is cool. Like we did it once in middle school. And but like real frogs are way cooler.
Right.
Because they move. And
When
so
they
that's
live
actually
with other frogs.
yeah. So that's the modern scholarship. And once you get kind of acclimated to the modern scholarship, and let's say you've got like a few generations of preachers who've been like trying to do it, it can corrupt your vision on the Old Testament, where you're just sitting there wondering about these things. And so coming back to it, you might not just immediately have it to be able to do the relationship things there. So yeah, I went, and the Catholics are recovering from that too, because we had a unfortunate uncritical acceptance of critical scholarship into our seminary programs in the 70s and the 80s, which led to a generation of bad preaching. So
What happened? Ted, yay!
Hello.
Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good that things lined up. So, yeah, what are we talking about? I caught something about dead frogs.
yeah, higher criticism and why we shouldn't. Oh, hold on, I just saw something in there. Rosaries for everybody. As long as you're treating it with appropriate respect, the rosaries for everybody.
Yeah.
I just recommended. Who was it? Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just start
It's,
praying the rosary.
it's a very Protestant thing, right? With the ownership and if you do what they came up with, they won't like it. And it's like Catholics aren't anything like that. It's very strange. It's always strange when I see it. I'm like, dude, what?
Yeah.
There's nothing. Everyone should ask the Blessed Virgin for her intercession. It will only do you good.
Can't go wrong. Can't go wrong. It's universal mom.
That's why they're
Yes.
bumping up against the divine feminine now. At least the symbolic world folks are, which I just found fascinating. Just bang, careened right into that wall. It's very funny to watch.
Well, I think.
Well,
I mean,
my like.
Yeah, I guess.
Oh, sorry, what were you gonna say,
the way
Paul?
I like to think about it is I just like to contrast the different paths that Our Lady and our Lord took into heaven, right? So our Lord gathered his disciples around and said, "Okay, guys, I'm leaving now." And then he was taken up out of their sight, and it's publicly recorded in Scripture. Like everybody could see, or at least everybody that mattered could see that this happened. And we've got it written down, and we've got a whole feast day in the church for it that's been there since the very beginning, all of that. Our Lady's Assumption, which is also one of the mysteries of the Rosary, that is just kind of in the tradition, and we're not really sure how it happened. And there's open debate among Catholic theologians to figure out if did Mary die first before she was assumed body and soul into heaven, or did she just fall into like a deep sleep and get placed into the tomb, which you can find in Jerusalem? And then
that's
we
one
pick
of the
it up there.
mysteries here.
Yes, the mystery, the Feast of the Assumption. So,
you know what's interesting is I had previously thought that like it was a Western thing to assume that she wasn't, and our priest on the Feast of the Assumption said that he said that generally in the West the belief had been that she had in fact died so that she might share in as much of our Lord's life, right? That he dies, and so she also experiences death like her son did. So
yeah. But when Pius XII declared the dogma in 1952, he worded it in such a way that it wouldn't settle it one way or another. Because he's like, we're not going to define it to that level. The actually all over the Council of Trent, if you're really up to date on the theological debates of the era, you'll see all the places where the Council of Trent used a more ambiguous wording to not decide with the with the Dominicans against the Franciscans on this particular issue, because we're going against the Protestants right now, and that's what's important. Sorry, excuse me. That was what was happening at Trent, though.
Good to see you, Ted. It's been a long time. I was thinking about you this weekend. Had some conversations.
Yeah, life has been
with Jess, and we were talking about you. And it's good to see you.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. It's just been really busy on the ground in very good ways. So, just life doesn't stop, and I've just been needed a lot in good ways. It's been really nice, and so, but that's meant I've had less margins. I've also found out that when I'm like acquiring a new skill set in my work, pretty much all of my like capacity for this kind of stuff just disappears. And so I have been doing a lot of stuff that's like outside of my normal area of expertise for the last like 4 or 5 months, and so it's like totally gone, and I'm kind of back with my work into more mapped territory, and so it's like, oh yeah, great, I have more. I don't know, I think it's just like all of my spare attention goes to mastering these skill sets, and it's only once that gets a little bit more mapped that I really have place for anything outside of that. So
excellent. Yeah, I'll probably end up gearing down a little bit here over the next several months. Ann and I are expecting in February, so that'll be
congratulations.
It'll definitely be. We had to talk about like so like enjoy your trip this weekend, because it'll be the last for a long time. And, and also, your YouTubing will go down quite significant, of course it will.
Chad, so we took the kids to the county fair this week, which was great, and we got enough tickets to like take a couple of the kids on the Ferris wheel and like on the merry-go-round, and this lady came up to us. She was younger lady, probably like first half of her 20s. She looked like she was in her second trimester, early in her second trimester. And she came up and was like, I'd like to give you these, basically you could buy them in like 20 tickets. Here's like, 16 tickets. And I thought about it afterwards, and I was like, you know what? I bet this is her first kid. And she's like, oh, I remember going to the fair and I love it. We're going to go to the fair and have a great time. And then she goes pregnant. I was like, I'm not having fun at the fair. So yeah, great. It was pretty funny. I was like, I think I see the story here. That did not top the nearly 400-pound pumpkin that someone had grown there. That was a thing. There is a what is C.S. Lewis's essay called "The Weight of Glory." That pumpkin had some of the weight of glory about it. It's
You can probably thank the Protestants for that. I'm just saying.
Yeah, the giant pumpkin. That was something. It was fascinating to like be next to a vegetable that weighed, more than twice my body weight. It made me feel like a very small child.
I saw some really big boys at the Minnesota State Fair this year.
I bet you probably had bigger boys than we did.
Yeah, because it's not a county fair. It's like the whole. So we had the winners for the whole state of Minnesota, and probably much like Arkansas, 4-H is still a thing here. So, there was one that was over 1,000 pounds.
That is what human ingenuity can do when it gets after something like that. Oh, that's so funny. Can I lob a hand grenade in here and see what you guys think? Okay, so this is a science fiction book that my friend put me on by Gene Wolfe. The whole thing is called The Book of the New Sun. And I don't really need to give you a lot of context to this. The main character is having, towards the end of the first of 4 books, he's having a dream, probably. There's a lot of sort of magical realism elements in terms of the way the story is told. But his old teacher who's dead and his dog, his three-legged dog who's been gone for a long time, and is probably dead, they show up. And this is in this, like, I don't know, like 10 million years in the future. It's the society that's ruled by the autarch. And so I'm just going to read this passage, and I want to know what you guys think about this. It was an effort for me to speak, but I managed in my dream, if it was a dream, to say, oh, sorry, his teacher says, Severian, that's the name of the main character, name for me the 7 principles of governance. I do not recall that we have studied such a thing, master. You always were the most careless of my boys, he told me, and fell silent. A foreboding grew on me. I sensed if I did not reply, some tragedy would occur. At last I said weakly, anarchy, that is not the governance, but the lack of it. I taught you that it precedes all governance. Now list the 7 sorts. So Severian says this: attachment to the person of the monarch, attachment to a bloodline or other sequence of succession, attachment to the royal state, attachment to a code legitimizing the governing state, attachment to the law only, attachment to a greater or lesser board of electors as framers of the law, attachment to an abstraction conceived as including the body of electors, other bodies giving rise to them, and numerous other elements, largely ideal. So he's like, right, he's listing tolerable of these, which is the earliest form and which the highest. And then Severian replies, the development is in the order given, master. I said, but I do not recall that you ever asked us before which was the highest. Master Malrubius leaned forward, his eyes burning brighter than the coals of fire. Which is highest, Severian? The last, master? That is, attachment to abstraction conceived as including, this is, you know, you're basically attached to the ideals and the abstractions that give rise to governance. He says, the last, master? You mean the attachment to an abstraction conceived as including the body of electors, other bodies giving rise to them, and numerous other elements largely ideal? Yes, master. Of what kind, Severian, is your own attachment to the divine entity? I said nothing. It may have been that I was thinking, but if so, my mind was too much filled with sleep to be conscious of its thoughts. Instead, I became profoundly aware of my physical surroundings. The sky above my face and all its grandeur seemed to have been made solely for my benefit and to be presented for my inspection now. Answer me, Severian. The first, if I have any, to the person of the monarch. Yes, because there is no succession. The animal that rests beside you, his old dog, rests beside you now, would die for you. Of what kind of attachment is his to you? The first. So
sounds very Western Buddhist.
Do you think so? Because what he's saying is that the highest form of attachment is not to abstracted ideals, but rather the person, right? Because there's this
That's
whole
wrong.
the whole thing in the Middle Ages about, you know, divine right to rule and monarchy, and he's saying, Gene Wolfe here is suggesting that the highest form of loyalty is not to abstractions and ideals, but to persons.
Yeah, that's
And
wrong.
You think that's wrong, Mark?
That's absolutely wrong. This is funny that it comes up because this is what I was saying earlier. Like, everyone's bumping into the divine feminine. That's what they're bumping into. They're bumping into that concept, right? Either they're or they're not there. They're bumping into the Old Testament as a way of resolving the fact that they focus too much on the New Testament and hit the end. Now they're focusing on the Old Testament. They're going to bump up against that, hit the end, right? And because they don't have the divine feminine correctly, you know, understood, and so that's the same thing. Like you're not attach the divine. Yeah, Ignacio, who's doing the translation for the language of creation, actually. He actually talked about this over the past couple of days. He was saying basically the divine feminine is all the relationship, like it's all relationship, and so in terms of attachment, the greatest attachment is attachment to the highest ethereal principle, right? Or for Catholics, that would definitely be God. And I'm not sure that works outside of Anglo-Cathodoxy, but for various reasons. But yeah, for Catholics, it would definitely.
I think what we're doing is we're getting to kind of the limits of things, and you can see this in a smaller way in mathematics. You get to the limits of things, and the numbers stop making sense.
Yeah.
And our mathematical models of, you know, singularities and such, we're getting to the limit, And it's like, okay, now it has infinite mass. I don't know what to do with that, right?
Right.
And what you're dealing with the highest principle is simultaneously the most abstract and the most real thing possible. So most abstract because God, being pure act, being pure spirit, contains all of it while not being contained by any of it, and doesn't have any kind of, existence that we can get our fingernails underneath. Yet it's the most real because it's the source of all of that coming down for us. And that's why he gave us a mediator, the man Jesus Christ. So we'd have something a little bit to attach to relate to. It's why he's left his church on earth to draw all people to himself. So we can have other human beings that we're walking along with rather than trying to worship something that's abstract. It's the pattern that was given to us in the Old Testament, where it wasn't like Moses, teach your disciples to empty themselves entirely of all passion and to empty themselves of entirely all feeling of their body so that they can be purely spiritual and contemplate my spiritual reality perfectly without any intermediaries. Like, no, build a tent, put an altar in there, light some incense, and slaughter some animals. This is just provisional. We'll improve it later.
So, okay, but here's the point that I think Gene Wolfe is trying to make, and that has been really resonating with me, is we talk as though we're capable of being attached to abstractions, and I'm starting to doubt whether or not we can be.
Sure, the abstractions.
That's what I'm saying.
The abstractions, they're
are
percepts. They're percepts and concepts inside of your intellect. They're basically
Yes.
objective second intentions. You don't need to worry about that technical jargon. Point is to say is that you never encounter these abstracted things in the wild unless they are somehow incarnated.
Yes.
Right? Because the form of the thing is in the thing that you're actually encountering.
So how's this, Ted? How's this? Abstractions are a referent to the space in which the attachment can happen. In other words, the two are related in that way. Does that help?
Not yet. I'm okay. So part of what clicked with that is the fact, and I'm also going back through C.S. Lewis's The Discarded Image, and in that there's a lot of discussion about. There's a really interesting passage, particularly about the person of nature, where first off, that in itself is just fascinating. Lewis basically says the goddess nature doesn't exist when people were nature worshippers. Why? Because you had to have a concept of nature as something separate from everything. You can't worship everything. Nature as a person has to be, you have to have a concept of supernature, and before you can have a concept of the goddess nature. But this movement, the movement, and I'm not trying to make some sort of argument about like the primitive mind needing to personify things, which again I think is what Gene Wolfe is attempting to address here. It's not that primitive minds need to personify things. It's that I don't know if this is what you're saying, but we just personify things like liberty. You go back and you look at like American art from the 1800s and
made by Protestants,
and liberty is a giant shining lady striding across the lands. And it's like, what the heck? I thought we were dedicated to an abstract ideal, which is liberty disconnected from any particular set of beliefs. It's like,
Also,
no,
her
we turned
name is
into a beautiful
Columbia.
lady. Well, yeah, right. Whose name is Columbia. Thank you. Right, exactly. So there's, I mean, abstract. I'm not at all like banging on abstractions as being utterly necessary. But when we say something like, when we talk about attachment or loyalty, I'm wondering to what degree because I even see this as one of the ways in which like communism fails, right? The idea is like, oh, we're all going to be loyal to the ideals of communism, and then what ends up happening is it's loyalty to the person of whoever the head of the party is that ends up just totally dominating, and the abstractions everyone's supposed to be attached to. I'm working this out right now, but do you see what I'm saying, Mark? How does that fit with what you said?
Well,
I think I know what you mean.
The communism, I have a video on the communism thing actually on socialism, right? That's just a magic trick of flattening the world, right? Basically their trick is you don't need a government. Let me show you. and all their examples are at the individual level, right? And as we know, things work differently at the individual. Like the if I were talking to you in person, just you and I right now, I'd use totally different language, it'd be a totally different experience, right? But because I'm talking here with other people on the internet,
Potentially
right?
unlimited number of people listening into this.
Right. Then that changes the nature of the relationship. The communists don't tell you government is not an optional concept. You will have a government. That's their trick. But to your more specific point about what we automatically personify, that's how we relate. And sure, I mean, you can go right into it. You can say, well, yeah, that's why God sent his son in the form that he did, so that we would have an exemplar closer to us to emulate. You can sort of wrangle it into banal propositions like that, but at the end of the day, the way you interact is actually never person to person. Because you're in a creation, you might call that nature. That's fair. You can swap nature and creation. It doesn't really matter. Well, just keep in mind that it preceded you, right? I think that's the starting point, not the Big Bang. And then you can have the fact that you have a pre-existing relationship with nature provides you the contrast to have any kind of relationship with persons, right? So again, it's a trinity. Basically, you need all three. You need your point in space. You need the space to do the thing, which is also the contrast, because you have a relationship with that space, and then the other person, and that's what provides you the attachment. So the attachment isn't the function of two objects in the world and the relation between them. Not that there isn't use in thinking of things that way, but it's actually part of the reason why I don't like what Ignatius is saying about the divine feminine being pure relationship, because he's leaving out the creation. And it would be okay to do that if I thought enough people understood there was a creation and you were born into it. Except the Peterson people and Vervaeke and all those, they don't even have that concept in their head. So I think it's more important to talk about the creation and that relationship, and the fact that that is the ground of relationality, and the fact that we prefer persons to relate to on average, but not everybody, right? Because that's where the climate Gaia worship comes in, because they're trying to relate directly to nature or the earth or something.
But see, Mark, I feel like that actually proves my point, because it's like they're not attached to an abstract notion of like geochemical balance and heat in versus heat out. They're not attached to an abstract model. In order to bind themselves to that project, they make it into a person that they can then attach to. Person of the earth named Gaia, right? It's like,
well, but some of them
I see what you're talking about in terms of mediation, but
some of them do, but some of them don't.
Yes,
and then it doesn't work, and it falls into chaos.
Generally not. And I agree with you, but in terms of what's found, generally the people who are going to go like blow up power stations are the people who, the degree to which they can see Gaia as a person, are the ones who are going to go attack whaling boat and blow up nuclear power stations. Like there's
a true trouble in the mediation between TED and the StreamYard servers right now.
And the StreamYard servers. Yeah.
I mean, this is one of those really complicated things where, we've got Aristotle's 10 categories. We can boil them down to 4: substance, and then the 3 kinds of accidents: quantity, quality, and relation. And you can kind of describe the whole world that way. And the most subtle of these, and probably the hardest one to get, is to try and figure out relationship, because I could talk about the shininess of this pen, and like that's really really simple, but like, well, what does this pen mean to me? And that's like, that could be really simple. It's just a pen that I use as a tool. Or it's like, oh no, this is our Diocese of Fargo Synod 2024 pen, and that synod was a really important event for me because blah, 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 and like these relationships just get very, very complicated, and it's
Not to mention the entire relationship with all the people you have not and will never meet that made that pen come into existence.
yeah,
And,
it all
and that's just your pen. That's not the screws in the drywall behind you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think, but what if I try this, Ted? The reason why none of those Gaia worshippers succeed is because their personification is broken, right? Because you have to personify the abstract in order to worship it. And so what happens is they split it into two camps. Either they stay in the abstraction and never do the Gaia thing at all, which many of them don't, which is still my argument, or they become part of an immediate cult. Like just bang, they're just because they cult of so-called cult of personality, which is just stating the same thing twice, right? All cults are cults of personality, right? All personalities have the ability to form cults, by the way. That's important to know, right? It's not a function of charisma as such. It's a state of the world. So you need to be aware of that. What that means is that proper personification matters. And when the proper personification isn't of the highest, and when it's not also mediated, because that's a different trouble, but it's a big trouble, then you fall into a Gnostic heresy.
Well, one of the reasons that this is relevant to my thought is that I find in my own life that I have this tendency that I somehow see movement towards a more abstract view of the Catholic faith as somehow being like more as being better. Right? There's this weird move of like it's somehow more profound to like see Christ as like an explanatory model for the universe than it is to recognize him as King and Lord. That's what I'm that's part of this is part of why like I'm trying to like chew on this thing.
Yeah, and the convenient thing about that is that a Christ who is, we'll say, merely an archetype and merely an explanatory principle through which you can understand a great deal of things. It doesn't make any demands on you. So we'll go back to the real Benedict XVI. Being Christian is not the result of an ethical choice or a lofty idea, but an encounter with an event. The Europeans mean something when they say event. A person, thank you, which gives life a new horizon and a decisive direction there. So that's that's a temptation right there of abstracting Christ out of his own grisly execution by the Romans, because that's what you're deciding to follow after.
Yeah, the crucifixion matters a lot, and I think the thing that, to me, what I heard you say, Ted, to some extent, was there's so much to explore in Catholicism, right? It's reciprocally opening. It's constantly opening up to you because of all the tools, right? And so once you're in, it's like, oh, there's more tools, and there's more tools, and there's more tools. And part of that, I would say, is there's more options for relationality. So like symbolism in particular, that's my big thing, the poetic way of informing the world, right? Or the parabolic way of informing the world, which allows you to symbolically link things together in enchantment. Like that's what enchantment is. It's actually linking things together, many to many or one to many, whatever. That opens up. And it doesn't open up randomly into any direction, though, because it's constrained by the symbols, right? And they tend to converge and then split and then converge because it's self-similar fractal, right? Which is exactly what fractals do if you just look at them. This is why I'm confused as to why everybody doesn't understand this to some extent. And so that's what I heard you say was, oh, this stuff keeps allowing me to go, further and further, and still get the same amount of stuff from it, because normal things in the normal world, like when you're learning something for your job, for example, right? you struggle in the beginning and you sort of get the hang of it, and then you sort of refine that, and then you're at a plateau, right? But in your spiritual journey, in your spiritual learning, that if it's right, that doesn't have to happen. Like, it's just all awesome all the time at a roughly, quote, equal level. That doesn't really apply, but it's close enough, right? Like, it's you can always get the same amount you got before again. It's always there.
I suppose, yeah, I don't know. There is such a thing in the tradition as spiritual desolation. But
Yeah.
that might not be what you're talking about.
No, I mean, it doesn't unfold that way necessarily, but it can. It has
Sure.
the
Yeah. No.
quality that it can.
That's what the life of heaven will be like. C.S. Lewis, again, he's just inside me. We've got one nice thing we can say about the Protestants is they gave us C.S. Lewis.
They did one good thing.
You keep on going deeper into Narnia, and there's more Narnia.
Yeah. Right.
You get through the fences in Aslan, or I don't even remember, but it's just more Narnia when you get there. So yeah, that accurately describes the life of heaven. But here, the Christian life is one of continual penance. That's my second Council of Trent reference for tonight. Feeling all right.
Yeah. So attachment, like breaking attachment down into types, is a problem, because attachment is something that should be able to grow much like a tree, roots or branch, or hopefully both, right, where you're intertwined. And so reducing it to the Western Buddhist idea, because what you described, I'm like, man, that sounds like it got ripped out of the Tao Te Ching or something. Like, that's a bizarre way to talk. That doesn't have no utility. It's a bizarre way to talk about it for me.
Except that I think in this particular passage, and again, I had like more context to it, and I've also thought about it for longer. I don't think that's what he's getting at, Mark. I think he's getting at the move, the Enlightenment move, to go from monarchy to constitutional monarchies to abstract governments formed by papers that say this is how the government is formed. And so he's not trying to trace some sort of he's just saying, look, Gene Wolfe as the author, using his science fiction story as a vehicle for saying, we have moved with the assumption in mind that we are progressing to good by having an increase to abstract. And I think right now you can see pretty clearly, when you have a government that is attached to abstractions, the result is that you get parasitic creatures that just inhabit those abstracted spaces. I don't know if anyone knows what I'm talking about here. And it's we're all attached to the system.
That didn't happen here. Like the reason for the success of the United States is the abstraction. It's actually the interpretation of a document. And we make that.
What about that big old temple to Abraham Lincoln in Washington, D.C.?
That was a lovely trip, by the way.
It was a lovely trip, but it's like we had. They literally call it a temple. Like I don't know how else to explain this to people.
Yeah.
Well, there's also the apotheosis of Washington, the painting that's called the Apotheosis of Washington.
Right, but those are specific anchor points that, if the symbolism is there, if you can symbolize, right, if you have the poetic way of informing the world, you have multiple points of attachment that get you closer to the higher abstract idea that the document points up to, right? And I could do that same trick and trace it with the Western tradition instead of the Eastern tradition, and show you exactly why actually what we've been doing is getting more and more abstract government over time from before the medieval era.
Yeah, totally.
Actually, I think I've got it. That's fine for governments of this world.
Also true.
If it works, if we have an appropriate peace and maintenance of order and invitation to virtue, that works. But that's not going to work for our ultimate attachment to the highest things.
Right. Well, right. So I would follow it up by saying, the problem with what Gene Will's talking about is he's trying to apply an ontology to what I mentioned earlier, which is something that is better understood, maybe not entirely, as the divine feminine or relation itself. And you can't ontologize that. Like that's an invalid move. That's what I would say, is that is the land where no ontology should even try to be applied.
I mean, it's sort of, there might be a hook in here to some of the medieval debates about, they had different ways of using the existence word, the copulative word, ens and esse and essentia. Right. So ens is kind of complicated. It's a participle. We translate that as being. Esse is an infinitive. We translate that as being. And essentia is a noun, and we translate that as being. So our English language is a little bit
Lacking.
Clunky.
A little bit lacking here. But the most interesting one to me, like ens is used for a being, right? So we've got a thinging here, so I've got this ends right here. So that's a nice, we can usually get our heads around that pretty quickly. And then essentia is, well, what kind of thing is that? What kind of being is that? So that, we got a water bottle here. It's an artifact. Artifacts, you run into trouble because there's only extrinsic unity applied by us. There's not intrinsic unity from the thing itself. But the water bottle's here. I'm the only intrinsic unity in the room. And then there's esse, right? ESSE, an infinitive, right? To be-ness, or as we could say, existence itself right there. And at a certain point, you don't want to define that too much, because existence itself, like, it has to do all of it. It has to do all of it, right? And there were these interminable debates in the scholastics, which are still burning quietly in certain quarters of the academy to this day. So whether or not there's actually a real distinction between an esse and essentia, or is that just a distinction in our mind that we can come up with an essence that does it? I can think of a meter cube of gold here, which would solve all of my financial problems, but might create some structural problems in the building. Yeah, that's I think the being, the essay of things and the way they're relating to each other has something to do with the mysterious things that we need to leave undefined. That's as far as I can go right now.
Well, Mark, your comment about your view on like what true religion ought to be doing is related very clearly to the distinction between a religious mystery and sort of the popular notion of a mystery, right? So, I mean, you've got these things at the core of the Catholic faith, which are the Holy Trinity, the Incarnation, the Blessed Sacrament, the most blessed sacrament of the Eucharist, where it's like you're not going to get to the bottom of those things, but they have the capacity to eternally bring forth understanding about it. But again, the thing that I'm wrestling with here is that my notion has always been that I am getting somewhere the degree to which I can abstract my understanding about those things. And I think the switch that I'm trying to make in my head is that, and this may be the thing that you're saying, those abstractions are valuable insofar as they bring me into a closer relation with that mystery. But that's the goal. The goal is not to have more statements that I can make correctly about it, but to understand that there's a utility to my intellect in that way, in which I can make that move so that I come into deeper relationship with those mysteries. But the relationship is the goal. The connection to them is the goal, and not the increase of the abstractions.
I would change one word there. I would say it's not the relation, it's the participation, and I think that fixes it.
Yeah, well, wouldn't that be just an increase in I mean, participation is a form of relation between two objects. I mean, relationship is like being, and that it's like
No,
it's one of those.
participation is what it creates a relation. Can't have one without it. You can't read a book, and that's what I was saying about language creation. You can't read the words of language creation and get anything out of it. It's not possible because there's nothing there to get out of it. And in fact, if all you do is say read the Bible, like, that's not going to work. Like, you have to live it out, right? And so the participation creates the relation. That's how it works. It's your action that creates the relation. The only thing that's there before that is the potential for a relation.
So we can think about it like there is creation all around us. And on account of the creation that's all around us, which we are already participating in,
Yes.
we now have the possibility of reading a book, talking to strangers on the internet, cooking up peppers, all of those things, which are afforded by just our participating existence in the world.
Or thrownness, if you want to use the reprehensible Heideggerian retardedness.
Just coming
But
in with all
I
of your yeah.
I'm Mark. I'm just not buying yet that being in relationship to something necessarily, and we may be using relationship differently necessarily, or you have to participate in something to have a relationship to it, right? So, for instance, like I have a certain relationship in my mind between myself and quadratic formulas, okay, but I don't have to. I'm not participating in quadratic formulas,
You're
right? But
participating in a world. You're participating in a world with right triangles, though.
Yeah,
yes.
you can't participate with something in your head. You have to participate in action. And so you're not related in your head. You have to relate
Well,
in
okay,
action.
so that's actually a difference, and Father could back me up on or could clarify this for me. But my understanding is that, particularly in the Thomistic tradition, the notion of the intellect is something that is capable of entering into relationship with the formal cause of a thing, right? I mean, that's what my intellect is doing. It's like it's not
Mhm.
just this. I'm actually taking the formal cause into my intellect. Like it
And
is.
your passive intellect becomes the form that's impressed upon it.
Yes. Yeah, and that's
It
happening in my head.
becomes the
To the
form.
degree to which anything just
Right.
happens in my head, being that we're hylomorphic creatures, and
So
therefore our formal and material causes are completely interrelated.
okay, so this is an interesting segue that actually is important. So here's actually what I wanted to talk to Father Eric about, which I was going to talk to him about offline if we didn't get to it. Ignacio told me maybe 2 days ago, maybe yesterday, I forget, that the problem with Thomas Aquinas and the problem in that line of thought in general was that they did not account for the divine feminine, right? So there was no, obviously I haven't read Tommy yet. Maybe I need to, I don't know. But he said it wasn't there, and that was what was missing. And I countered with, actually, what if, because I don't know one way or the other, but I countered with, what if that when Jonathan Pageau, for example, says, medieval thought is fundamentally different, that difference is actually, I don't want to reduce it to this, but I want to say this is the primary difference, is that the assumption of the divine feminine, which is the thing that allows and holds all relationship, was axiomatic in medieval thought, and which is correct, and therefore you wouldn't write about it. You shouldn't try anyway, and therefore that's why Thomas Aquinas wrote what he wrote, and why it works for the medievals and may not work the same for us, because we've lost the. But that's the same as saying we lost our grounding or we've lost our sense of nature. It's also the same as saying domicide, by the way, right? I'm saying the same thing, right? We've lost our sense of what a relationship is and how to discern the quality of those relationships, because our participation is muted or broken, or in some cases not there, right? If you interface with the video game world, you won't know how to run a business, like because you haven't tried to run a business, right? And that's a very good example. Most people who try to run business fail completely, and you're going to run 3 or 4 before you even have a chance of actually running one successfully in general, right? And so it's all about that participation. And until you actually do the end result of whatever equation is in your head, you haven't participated in it. You don't know it because you can't know things until the end of an action. That was the discussion I was having just before coming on here. And therefore you haven't related to it. All you have is an image of it in your head. And that's very useful for making predictions, but it's not the same as a manifestation which you can participate with.
See, that's
Trouble is
okay,
she's
but
not using medieval vocabulary. So it takes a while for me. He could just use perfectly clear terms like a formal first intention and an objective first intention, and then I know exactly what he was talking about. But he's not doing that.
Action, action, action. What the part of the flattening of the world is we flatten time. So like the conversation I was having, the guy kept flattening time, and I said, you can't pass knowledge on to people because you don't have knowledge and it isn't independent of your participation. And therefore, if you give somebody information that leads to them having knowledge, you can only know that at the end of their participation.
To my friend down in the corner, you usually have to elbow your way in.
Amen. Well, being that I'm probably the youngest in the faith here, I'd rather listen more than I speak. But so he who seeks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, but let him ask in faith, for he who asks without faith will surely receive nothing from the Lord, for he's an unstable man. He's a double-minded man, unstable in all of his ways, tossed about like a wave on the ocean by the wind. So what is wisdom if not knowledge applied well? Well applied knowledge is wisdom. So you're saying you can't have knowledge. But then why would God said he who asks for wisdom, let him ask of God? And if wisdom is defined as knowledge well applied, then how can you say that people don't have knowledge? That seems like a non sequitur to me.
I mean, people didn't have knowledge.
So where are you getting this?
You said you don't have any knowledge to give.
No, you can't give knowledge. That's
right.
You can't give knowledge. That's correct. It's not independent of your participation.
I've talked to Mark a lot. He makes a very strong distinction between knowledge and information. Information you can give to people, knowledge.
So you can relay information. You can't give someone knowledge. They have to understand it.
Right.
They have to do it.
They have to adopt it. They have to apply it.
They have to do something. Okay. Right? I can't give you the knowledge of how to make a knife. You have to make the knife. I can give you information that I think will help you personally make a knife. And that information that I give to you might be totally different than the information I give somebody else on how to make a knife. So it's not even a stable thing in the world because it's not independent of you and it's not independent of me because my understanding of how to make a knife, which is 0, by the way, so don't ask me. My understanding of how to make a knife might not be sufficient, even if I've made many knives, might not be sufficient to convey information that's useful to you because it doesn't contain the information that you're missing. Right?
Yeah.
And that actually happens all the time with experts. All the time. There's a lot of people that can
with respect
at the craftsman level and can't describe it to anybody else in a useful fashion.
You're just kind of saying the same thing over and over again. With respect, though, to your point, I'm a kinetic learner. I learn from doing a couple times, 3 times, and then I'll grasp it. I might be able to tell you, Mark, hey, you take a left down here, you go down past this intersection on Elm Street, you're going to turn right, and you might have it. I might need a map and a compass. You know what I'm saying? So it's interesting to your point, different people learn at different ways and have to manipulate it, can hear it, can see it. Some have memories that they can recall. They can see something photographically and remember it.
Different information, right? Different information and different types of information and different deliveries of information make a big difference to the person that you're communicating with. But and the only way you know that is through the relation that you have with them.
Right. So I just found that interesting. I'm not trying to fight with anyone, but something that really piqued my interest and got me in the channel was you had mentioned being in Washington D.C. and you guys were talking about the monuments there.
Mhm.
Now I said, I don't know if y'all remember during the Summer of Love, where everything was on fire in America and they were tearing down statues left and right. And for Father Eric, this is kind of for you. I guess I would have been born Greek Orthodox. But I'm now a professing Christian, non-denominational, and I don't really. I'm in the crawl of the crawl, walk, run phase, right? So I'm crawling. I'm not even. Thank you, sir.
Mhm.
I mean, I've read maybe a third of the Bible with my own eyes. I've listened to it a few times in my sleep, but with my own eyes, I've maybe read a third of the Bible. So I'm not a teacher. I'm not a pastor. I don't proclaim to know things. I have a lot of questions, and I seek people like you that might have answers. That said, I posited to people that were angry about our quote unquote history in America and our statues and our history being pulled down. And I thought to myself, didn't God say it basically make no graven images? And what is a statue if not a graven image? What is and the Bible also says that God can take what was meant for evil and use it for good. Meaning, I would think that someone like Antifa or BLM trying to tear down our history would be an act of evil, but in fact, actually, it's for the greater glory of God to tear those things down. To instead of me looking at a statue of George Washington per se, I could be instead worshiping Jesus in my heart. Does that make sense? It's
Can
one
I
less
ask you-
distraction.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely, please do.
Was that a question?
So I posited that, and I was just wondering what your thoughts would be on the fact that when the Bible says make no graven images, do you think that it is possible that God was using what some people in America might have perceived as an evil act, but actually was doing for the greater glory of God by tearing those statues and those images down, so that we could better, more closely worship the Lord and not these men? Does that make sense?
Can I I mean the first one that's just pretty easy is when you look at the tabernacle,
Mhm.
there's all kinds of images woven into the curtain. There's angels, there's cherubim on the ark. So you go into the holiest place in what's should be even more like anti-image religion, the Hebrew worship than Christianity, where you have an incarnate God. And there's images everywhere. So no, graven images doesn't just mean like representations of things. Like it obviously doesn't. That's a
Well,
non-starter.
it says, pardon me, sir. It says Exodus 24, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath,
Well,
or
you
that
need to
is in
get
the
rid of your
water
phone
underneath.
then. You need
What's
to get
that?
rid of your phone, and you need to get rid of your TV screen, because I don't see the difference between these
Yeah.
graven images that you're interacting with and statues. Because
It-
if you're
There's a
going
bunch
to,
of stuff in the middle,
Yeah,
right?
and
That's what
like, if
you're
you're
missing the middle.
if you're
But
going to,
is that phone in heaven?
no,
It's a material creation here on earth, right, by man.
okay,
Okay.
It-
So, like,
it-
for instance, why see my understanding is, do you believe that Jesus is risen?
yep,
Then why is he still attached to a crucifix?
yeah.
Are you really
I
going to kick me?
usually,
Are you really going to kick me? You're getting ready to kick me, aren't you?
yeah. And the thing is
That's
I
really.
find,
I understand. I'm a wolf.
well, I
Because
just find
questions,
these,
religious
find
people don't
these,
like questions.
I find these,
Respect, Father. Go ahead
I
and
find these
continue to be
discussions
deceived.
tedious. I find these discussions tedious. Yeah.
Well, they are. There's a lot of squishing. Like God can turn this into good. Therefore, the fact that it happened is good is bad logic. It's just
Yeah,
bad
well,
reasoning, bad rationality, bad logic.
I mean,
Right?
he could
The
just,
fact that something can be changed later into something else does not make the initial act good, and it doesn't redeem it either.
Well, to go back to C.S. Lewis in Paralandra, he says, Malel is his word for God. He's like, is God a creature that he'll be turned aside? Like,
Yeah.
something good's going to come out of it, but that doesn't mean that's, Father, you weren't going to win that one. So
Well, there was nothing to win there.
there's no winning. There's no winning. There's no winning.
That was a chaos zombie. I think that's the best. That's not my term, by the way. I stole it, but I'm not going to give the person credit. So
my plan for such people is to program a large language model based on the works of Trent Horn,
There you go.
and then we'll just, because the arguments they always come down to like intractable arguments based on differences in first principles, and nobody ever wants to get to first principle. I don't want to go to
But-
first principles.
Well, he
Like, I don't really
he
want to
didn't.
dig around there.
He begged out before you could answer because he didn't.
Yeah.
He sensed you had an answer, and that would have been too much to bear, which is why he quit. Right, saying, "Oh yeah, you don't like to answer these questions. You're definitely going to kick me. I'm getting out of here before you give me an answer I don't want to hear that is correct." And that's the flat world people. They unconsciously they know they're in the flat world. They know they're compressing time and compressing concepts down. And the minute you try to re-enchant the world, boom.
Okay.
Mark, did you know, speaking of your distinction between knowledge and information, do you know that T.S. Eliot quote?
Nothing personal. Nothing personal. I think we just need to clear a little bit of the air here. I very much dislike apologetics type conversations. I very much dislike arguments. Actually have a very low tolerance for them. And I really don't want to turn these streams, which I enjoy because of the exploration mode, into another, Christian versus Baptist apologetics bloodbath. I just don't like doing that. And so I guess that accounts for my rather allergic reaction to the type of conversation that Generally Specific wanted to have. I just don't want to have that kind of conversation. Not on a Sunday night, not after I've been doing church stuff all day. And I think there's a space for that. And I think there's people who really like to dig their teeth into that kind of a debate. And I would invite Mr. Generally Specific to have those kinds of discussions with those people. But that's not the goal on my YouTube channel, and that's not what I want to do. So I have my doubts as to whether Mr. Generally Specific has any intention of participating in this stream in the way that we are accustomed to on this channel. And I guess this won't be like a permaban or anything, but it's not what I'm looking to do here. And since it's my channel, that's the way we're doing things. So with that, maybe he'll show up on your stream on Friday, Mark, and then you guys can just hack it out there, because you've got a much bigger appetite for pugilism than I do.
I'm better with the flat world too.
Yeah.
I know where they're coming from. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ted, finish your question. I'm completely enthralled.
Oh no, I was just asking. I just like that in Courses from the Rock, Eliot has that famous line, "Where's the wisdom we've lost in knowledge? Where's the knowledge we've lost in information?" He was tracking with that distinction that was going on there, where and I need to chew on your distinction between information and knowledge. I was on a really long drive this week, and I listened to some of the first podcasts I had in ages. And which one was it? It was something from Jonathan Pageau, but he was talking about the guy on was talking about like live options versus dead options, which I think is a William James idea, which I don't generally love everything that I've heard from William James, but the idea that like some people just like, there are ideas that are just non-starters for them, and they just won't. They will they like won't even consider it. And then your notion that knowledge being something you can't give connects with, I think, what William James was trying to get at with like live options versus dead options. At any rate,
Hmm.
I just thought that was an interesting thing. I mean, you also see that when you try to teach. I think I see what you're getting there. Although I
The
might,
trouble
I
is,
mean, I
he's
might,
invented his own vocabulary.
I
No,
know,
I
know.
didn't. That's the funny part. I'm just using vocabulary that's been there all along that people aren't like. You could just rederive this from definitions in the dictionary. It's all there. Like it's all thoroughly consistent with how people use these words in the past. It's thoroughly consistent with the dictionary definitions. It's all completely right there. It's just that people kind of don't do that anymore for whatever reason. And yeah, I mean, Ted, you should watch one of either the live stream knowledge engine video or my knowledge engine video where I've got the slide and everything, because that kind of outlines this whole thing. And a lot of that was just, reverse engineering from what Vervaeke's 4 P's of knowledge were, because Vervaeke kept saying knowledge and describing information. And I'm like, bro, like you're describing information. You're not describing knowledge. And
Mhm.
there's a whole science around this called information theory. Like it's Claude Shannon. Like I don't understand why anyone's confused about this. You should read the white papers on information. And knowledge is mysterious. Like
Interesting.
it's something people don't. They just compress the world into. They compress signals and information and call it knowledge. And it's like, no, there's a lot more going on there. And when you don't enchant the world with signals and understand information, which is the layer of translation or interpretation, roughly, then you can't even get to knowledge, much less understanding, and you won't understand wisdom, which is none of that, and doesn't depend on any of it either, by the way.
Right. Yes. Yeah. That was one of the good things I got in college philosophy class was getting my notion of wisdom plenty shook up and realizing that I needed to spend some more time considering that. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean there's so much too just in all of this in terms of trying to not be a modern Gnostic in terms of the way that I think about how I interact with the world. They're just like I just swim in that. I like the whole thing that okay, so I mean, sort of like the part of the thing behind the thing that I was bringing up with this whole aspect of like attachment to abstractions versus to persons is that sort of lingering, thriving implicit Gnosticism of the modern world that would like to be rid of as much as possible. Yeah, and that I think we have this notion that abstractions are somehow more pure than embodied reality because they're non-physical, because we perceive of abstractions as being non-physical, and
Right.
in a flat world that doesn't have the spiritual, non-physical takes the place of spiritual. And I mean, and like it hurts my brain to say those things together, but I think that that's kind of like the move that's being made. And so
Yeah.
it's like if I could, and I'm just thinking like back to sort of the hyper science math nerd culture of the people that I went to
Mhm.
school with, and like what was the there's this phrase that people threw around. I'm trying to remember this. Oh yeah, it was like basically I can't remember what they're like little people talk about people, you know, something people talk about things, and great people talk about ideas. Like, I mean, that was the hierarchy right there. It was like if you're a scumbag, you talk about other people. If you've got a little bit of a brain, then
Right.
you'll talk about
Right.
things like an engineer. But like the truly great people, they only talk about ideas. And it was like, I mean, that I'm not going to deny it. Like, dude, I totally bought that.
Yeah.
And what's weird about that is that just totally cuts you off from the capacity
Mhm.
to relate to persons just even on a basic level.
I mean, there's a certain amount of like tabloid. Like I remember that quote too, and I remember immediately thinking of like, and I was like in high school. I immediately thought of like tabloids and news cycle stuff. I noticed the news cycle
Yeah.
when I was like in third or
Yeah.
fourth grade.
Yeah.
Like I noticed that quite a bit earlier than I had any right to. And so that was the way I took that people thing,
Yeah.
which is actually very vulgar and debasing, because you're not interacting with people in an uplifting way. Yeah.
Well, how
So
about this, Ted? So when you flatten down, right, but by sheer denial, we'll say, or rebellion, or however you want to think about it, when you flatten the world, right, and you try to remove the ethereal, right, or materialize it, right, when you become a materialist, what you described is correct. But where does it go? It goes into your imagination, and then what happens is you spend more time in here and less time communing with Ted at the campfire, and then having a meal afterwards at his house.
Yeah.
Which truly, like, that was just wonderful. I mean, I should thank you right now for that, because it's still in my head, right? It's still
Yeah.
and it's not in my head, it's in my being. Like, it's changed the way I talk about everything I talk about since the event. That's the enchanted world, where the stuff in your head comes out, allows you to relate again, and then that relation changes your other relations, right? That's the reciprocally opening expanse. And then the way to, in my opinion, and this is why I do all this on navigating patterns, right? In my opinion, the way to understand this is to say the age of gnosis, which is knowledge is propositions, and propositions is the highest value because they're knowledge. I know it's a little funny way to think about it. Once you see that, you'll be able to easily identify on others, figure out where they actually are, like what it is they're actually talking about, because when they use propositions, they won't be able to accurately reflect what's in their heads, right? And it'll keep you out of it, because once you have the frame, it's like, oh, because that's what I use to catch myself all the time, right? I go, age of gnosis. Okay, age of gnosis. Am I overemphasizing the propositions and underemphasizing the participation? And there's a participation in propositions, right? Of course. But what is that? For me, it's accurate, precise speech. It just happens to be a trick I can do. Most people can't do it, right? It's also the Peterson trick to some extent, right? But also it's the appeal to the poetry, because the thing, I'll tell you, Ted, the thing that really stuck with me from Convivium was when you said, well, we've got these AIs writing poetry, and the AI engineers are declaring that it's definitely poetry, and you can't tell it from other pieces of poetry. And then all you followed up with was, I can see why they would think that. Right, because the rest of us can tell the two apart like nothing. It's so different. It's ridiculous to think that the
it can
AI
be comic,
poetry
but it can't
resembles
be
poetry.
profound.
Right.
I've had ChatGPT write me some comic things that are it's mildly amusing, but it can't tell me about shook foil, and Ted's the one who actually has that one memorized.
Yeah, no, Mark. Okay, but to your point about the campfire, which is great. I mean, and this is sort of like a little bit of it's pulling a little bit of stuff from the evening together, which is, it's not that you're not supposed to be in your head, and this really also connects with the gospel reading from the 1962 missal today, which is one of the gospel accounts in which the Pharisees come to our Lord and they say, "What's the greatest commandment?" And he says, "Love Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself." And so the point is not, well, you shouldn't be in your head using your imagination, but that you should be seeking a life in which those things are as fully integrated as possible, because it's not like people who've not exercised their intellectual faculties, and when I say that, I don't mean they have to like have read great books, that they have to have had an education, any of those things. I mean, you've met the people who have read all kinds of books and have gone to all kinds of school, and there are certain faculties in them that are obviously dead, and then you meet other people who have probably had an 8th grade education, if that, haven't read a book in 30 years, and are just like totally alive in those ways. The point is not to use it or to not, to be in your head, to not be in your head, but to be trying to order all of those powers of your soul, right? Because the intellect, your imagination being part of your intellect, I believe, Father, ordering that
It's a
towards,
faculty of the soul.
it's a faculty of the soul.
Yeah, it's close. I mean, they're close. You know, they
Close enough.
exchange
Yeah,
information.
but all of those, you're trying to live in a way in which all of the powers of your soul, the powers of your body, the powers of your mind are all ordered towards what's good.
Yeah.
And which is
Right.
a person, to go back to that quote from Pope Benedict. Yeah. And then Padre, whoever that is, just said Plato's soul, psyche. The great pun of the 20th century is that we've denied the soul and embraced psychology.
Right. Right.
I'm
Well,
like,
I want to go back
it's-
to this. I don't
it's
think
the
you
dang
heard it.
study of the soul.
So Ted, Ignacio, when talking about this book, said the proper way to engage with this particular text, because it's not really a book, because you don't really read it, because it's got all the information's in the pictures. There's no information in the words. The proper way to interface with that book is to go out into the world and participate, right? In other words, if what you're doing in your head is either staying there too long or not only putting things in your head that you can participate with, then you're causing yourself a problem that you don't need to cause yourself.
Father Eric's got that German timeliness look on his face.
Well,
He
we got
does.
3 minutes. You guys got anything good we can do in 3 minutes?
No, yes, that's very funny, Father. Thank you. That's very funny. 3 minutes.
Yeah,
Sure,
mark my gift
Ted
for two
or I.
sentences.
3 minutes by ourselves, either one of us, much less together.
Oh man.
Well, I think it's been a very exciting evening with a lot more action than I was expecting, and I've got a feeling many of you participated in the North Estuary event and are sitting in airports and were the amusement that you found. But I'm afraid the amusement stream is coming to an end because it's dark outside, and at this time, rational people go to bed. So, as a rational person, I'm going to end this stream and just encourage everybody to fear God and pray for one another, and yeah, hopefully we'll all make it. So good night and God bless you all.